Yeah, I'm Susan Zook. I am a branch chief in the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, and I'm actually in their policy office, so I'm going to talk a little bit about policy. But I have this other role, and that is the lead on the inactive ingredient database. The IID, I'm going to use that acronym throughout. The IID has been in existence for over 30 years, and it's been pretty much the same format for all of those 30 years. We've gone from a hard copy and paper to an electronic version, but basically it's had the same format, the same information. This year, we have the opportunity to make big changes in the IID, and I think it's going to make the IID a much more useful reference for industry. So I'm excited to talk about those changes, and that's what I want to get to. But first, because I'm in the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, I'm going to say something that you will find familiar. Pharmaceutical quality, a quality product of any kind consistently meets the expectations of its users, and drugs are no different. Patients expect safe and effective medicine with every dose they take. Pharmaceutical quality is assuring that every dose is safe and effective and free of contamination and defects. And that is what gives patients confidence in their next dose of medicine. Okay, back to inactive ingredients. Because I'm from the policy office, I'm going to begin with a bit of policy. The regulation that governs ANDAs and having to do with inactive ingredients says that ANDA applicants must provide information demonstrating that the inactive ingredients in their products do not affect safety and efficacy. And when you think about the structure of an ANDA, ANDAs are not expected to provide clinical studies that would prove that the inactive ingredients in their products are safe. So how does an applicant address this? Well, most applicants cite previous safe use of the inactive ingredients in their products, and that's how they meet this requirement. And that is where the inactive ingredient database becomes so important to the generic drug program. The IID provides that evidence of previous safe use of inactive ingredients in products that have been approved by the FDA. So by referencing the IID, you're going some way to meeting this requirement. It doesn't mean that the FDA will not ask you for additional information about the inactive ingredients in your product, depending on the use pattern for the product, population, the type of dosage form. But for most applications, referencing the IID for the inactive ingredients is sufficient. There was another policy document that just got published this past July. It's near and dear to my heart, and it's called the using the IID. I'm wondering how many people in the audience have read this guidance? Oh. I know people online can't see this, but what would you say percentage-wise, Jeff? Only 17.4% of the audience read the guidance. Well, I've provided a link on the bottom of the slide. Now, since Jeff did his little exercise, I know you all have your phone. You can go to the link at the bottom of the slide and check out the guidance. I think that every applicant should read this guidance because you're expected to reference the IID, so you should know what the information in the IID means. And this guidance is full of good information, and it's pretty short. You could read it in a night. This morning, I'm going to go over 3 basic topics. I'm going to talk about some IID basics, just to get everybody up to the same speed. And then I'm going to go into some of the highlights of the new guidance and delve a little deeper about what the terminology means in the IID. And then I'm going to get to those important changes that you're all going to see as we move towards 10/1/2020. And then I'll leave you with some important contact information. So first, the basics. What is the IID? Well, it's just a searchable list that contains the excipients that have been used in approved products. And when I say that, I mean the excipients that have been used in ANDAs and NDAs. We have not yet included excipients and BLAs in the IID. And for each excipient, there is something called a maximum potency. It's the maximum level of that excipient that's been used for a particular route of administration and dosage form. So the IID has been a toolbox for drug product development. And I've provided a link on the bottom of the slide to the IID, which you can also check out if you've never been to our webpage. Why was it created? Well, it provides that evidence of previous safe use of excipients, which now you know is very important to meet your regulatory requirements. And it provides some good specific information about how excipients have been used. So it gives that information about what routes of administration the excipients have been used for and what dosage forms and what levels. And as I mentioned, it's a resource for drug product development. Who uses it? Well, basically all segments of the industry use the IID. Although I'm speaking today to the generic drug manufacturers, actually we see the IID referenced in INDs, NDAs, and even BLAs. And the FDA uses the IID. And this is something people in industry should know. When we receive your application at the filing stage, they're comparing the ingredients in your composition statement to what's in the IID. It's also used during the technical reviews, and our farm tox reviewers reference the IID. So I want to delve a little deeper into what you see when you're doing a search in the IID. For each line item in the IID, for each record, there are 3 key elements associated with each inactive ingredient. The inactive ingredient name, its route of administration, and its dosage form. And those 3 key elements form a record. We call them the team of 3. For each excipient, there are also 2 identification codes, the CAS number, which most of you would be familiar with, and something called a UNI. There's also a maximum potency, an excipient level associated with each of those records. We get a lot of questions about where the names come from that are in the IID. They come from another FDA system called SRS, or Substance Registration System. The SRS folks assign what's called a preferred term to each ingredient. And they also assign that UNI code. It's a unique identification code that goes with that substance. The maximum potency that you see associated with each record in the IID is the amount of that ingredient per unit dose. So if you see, for example, lactose monohydrate for an oral tablet, when you see that maximum potency associated with that record, that's the amount of lactose monohydrate in 1 tablet. In future, we're going to have a new term, maximum daily exposure. And that's going to be the amount that's in a total daily dose of that ingredient. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to the changes. This is what a search looks like when you do a search in the IID. In this case, I took a screenshot of a search for the term beta-dex. That's an ingredient that's used in products. And I actually filtered my search because I got a large number of hits and I wanted them to all fit on the slide. So you can do this too. If you're only looking for the ingredient and how it's used in a specific dosage form or a specific route of administration, you can enter a search term into the filter and narrow your search. And you can see here, I got hits for any string that included the search term that I used. So I also got hits for hydroxypropyl beta-dex, which I wasn't interested in, as well as beta-dex. But if I were an applicant and I wanted to reference the IID in my application and I wanted to use beta-dex in an oral product, I would be looking for the highest amount or the maximum potency associated with beta-dex in an oral product. And I've highlighted here the hit for 133 milligrams. That's what I would be wanting to use as my reference. I would pick the highest amount. This is how most folks in industry use the IID. They're just looking for that highest maximum potency. And I want to tell you that it is the route of administration that's the important factor. So if I were formulating a capsule or even an oral solution, and I wanted to use beta-dex, I could still reference this highest level for the oral route of administration as a basis to support my application. I'm going to hit a few points about that new guidance that everybody's going to read tonight, right? Using the IID. This guidance provides advice for IND applicants, NDA applicants, and ANDA applicants. And it explains how FDA uses the IID. And I think this is really important towards transparency about what happens to your application when it reaches the FDA. I know there's a lot of mystery sometimes in how assessors are viewing your application. So the guidance gives some good solid information about how we use the IID in evaluating your products. And the guidance also provides information on the sources of data that go into the IID. So it demystifies that as well. This guidance is currently in draft. That's really good news for industry, because when a guidance is in draft, that gives you in industry the opportunity to go to the docket and comment on the guidance. You can tell us if you think something's missing, if you think something is incomplete, if something is confusing. We will gather those comments, and when we draft the final version of the guidance, we'll take those comments into consideration and make changes in the guidance as appropriate. So I've given a link to the guidance on the bottom of the slide, as well as a link to the docket. The docket's going to be open until October 9th, so please, if you have comments on the guidance, go in and make them before October 9th. I'm going to hit on some points that are made in the guidance that I think are sources of confusion for a lot of ANDA applicants. Excipient grades. This can be very troubling for applicants. My advice to you is always tell us what the grade of the excipient is if the excipient comes in various grades. You'll see in the IID that for certain excipients, we have a large number of grades listed. You should always reference the record in the IID for the grade that you are using. If you can't do that, if you want to reference a different grade, give us the linkage between the two grades. Tell us why you think what you're referencing in the IID is supportive of the grade that you are using and the level that you are using. I think a mistake that a lot of applicants make is to not give that justification. If you send a different grade, something that's not found in the IID with no justification, that's a sure, well, I can't guarantee you're going to get a refuse to receive, but that's just a bad practice. So always give us that information. Flavors, colors, and excipient mixtures. This is another source of confusion. Always provide us with the quantitative breakdown of those mixtures. If, for example, you're purchasing a flavor from a manufacturer and they tell you that the quantitative breakdown of the ingredients in their product are proprietary, ask them if they have a drug master file and that they can provide you a letter of authorization for that drug master file. We will go and look up the quantitative breakdown. But without knowing what the ingredients are in that flavor, we can't approve the product. We need that information. When referencing colors, color additives should be listed. or must be listed in our Code of Federal Regulations. So you should be able to cite the specific regulation with which that color additive complies. About 2 years ago, I think it was, we recognized that we had some really old color additives listed in the IID that weren't in the regulations, and we have removed them. So everything in the IID should be found in our Code of Federal Regulations, and you should be able to cite the specific regulation with which that color additive complies. A lot of applicants want to cite the GRAS regulations, or GRAS notification, or FEMA GRAS, or food additive regulations to support the ingredients in a mixture. You can do that, but make sure that whatever you're citing matches up with the type of product that you are manufacturing. We've had applicants come in and cite some food additive regulation that's completely disconnected from the use pattern of the drug that's being formulated. So make sure that what you're citing makes sense and you can support it. When in doubt, send controlled correspondence. You can always ask us questions about the acceptability of a particular grade of an excipient or a particular rationale to support the use of excipients in your product. All right, the changes. So back in 2017, when GDUFA 2 was signed into law, when we reauthorized the generic drug user fee amendments, we made 2 commitments having to do with enhancing the IID. The first commitment is that we are going to include maximum daily exposure or maximum daily intake in the IID, and we're going to do that by 10/1/2020, so that's coming up. And we also made a commitment to notify industry of changes that are made from quarterly publication to quarterly publication. The IID is published quarterly. We just had a publication in July, and the next one will be in October. So we're going to have a notification to explain to industry everything that has changed. So how will the IID evolve as we make these changes? Well, the first big change is that the metric's going to change. Instead of maximum potency, the amount per unit dose, we're going to have maximum daily exposure for ingredients. While this is not one of the GDUFA 2 commitments, we also are implementing new data standards for routes of administration, dosage forms, and also for units of measure. And we'll be posting notices of everything that has changed from quarter to quarter. So those are changes that you're going to see coming up. I want to say a few words about what we mean when we say maximum daily exposure. Some people call this maximum daily intake if it's an oral product, but maximum daily exposure is sort of a broader term that includes maximum daily intake as well as exposure from other routes of administration. The maximum daily exposure of an excipient is the amount of that excipient that a patient is exposed to based on the maximum daily dose of the drug product in which it's used. So you have to know the maximum daily dose in order to calculate the maximum daily exposure. Once we have information, and we're going to be phasing this information in as we gather it, once we have this MDE information, that will replace maximum potency. So we're not going to have both the maximum potency for the ingredient as well as maximum daily exposure. We'll either have one or the other for each record. And once we have maximum daily exposure in the IID, applicants can then use that as the reference instead of that unit dose amount, that maximum potency. And we think that this is a much better reference for applicants than that unit dose amount. As I mentioned, we are implementing new data standards, and actually we already implemented them. If you've gone to the IID since our July publication, you're already seeing our new data standards. We've implemented these data standards to make the IID more accurate and more consistent. And the new data standards are, as I mentioned, for the routes of administration and dosage forms. We used structured product labeling, which is a recognized FDA system, as our standard. So all of the terminology for dosage forms and routes of administration comes from structured product labeling, which you can look up on the FDA website. We've also standardized the units of measure for various dosage forms. So all of the solid oral dosage forms, the ingredients are given in milligrams. If it's a liquid oral dosage form, the ingredients are given in milligrams per milliliter or milligrams per 5 milliliter if that's the dose. Topical dosage forms are generally given in percentage weight per weight, sometimes weight per volume, depending on how the applicants have provided that information. If you're interested in the mapping that we've done between old terminology and new, you can go to the link at the bottom of the slide. This takes you to the IID webpage. We have a link called Most Recent Changes to the IID, and we've provided all of the mapping. Okay, and we're also going to be reporting changes. That's that second GDUFA 2 commitment. And those changes are going to be reported through something called a change log. This is going to be a separate link on the IID webpage, and it will include all of the replaced information from quarter to quarter, all of the deletions, and all of the corrections. On the primary IID webpage, that will continue to look pretty much the same, except that as we gather the information on maximum daily exposure, MDE will replace maximum potency. We will continue to identify anything that's new in the column that says update question. We put a little Y for yes if it's an updated record. And that column, we designate with a Y any new excipients that are appearing in the IID, any new routes of administration or dosage forms associated with that excipient, and when the maximum potency is at now a higher level or the maximum daily exposure is a higher level. That will all be designated with a Y to show you that that's a new record. The last thing I want to leave you with is how to contact us, depending on what your question is. So first of all, everybody's going to read the guidance, right? If you want to make comments to the guidance, this is a link to the docket. If you want to know more about the changes to the IID, you can go to the IID website. We have frequently asked questions link that you can go to. If you want to contact the IID staff directly, you can go to the link, the mailbox IID update, and this is really intended for questions about what you're seeing in the IID. If you think that something's missing, if you think that something's incorrect, we greatly appreciate that kind of information as well. And we will look it up and make changes as appropriate. Rebecca Granger's in the audience, and if you've written to this link, you've been talking to her already. If you have questions about the nomenclature that you see in the IID, recall that that comes from another system, our substance registration staff. They have a mailbox, fda.srs, and you can write to them and ask questions about the preferred terms that are used in the IID. And if it's incorrect, they will make corrections. I know Karen mentioned this, but if you have questions about a generic drug product under development, especially if you want to ask questions about the acceptability of grades of an excipient, et cetera, you can send that through controlled correspondence. And I've given a link at the bottom of the page to the guidance on controlled correspondence. So now you know that the IID should be referenced in ANDAs, that it's a list of excipients in approved FDA products, and it gives you that confidence that those were previously safely used. The IID is a tool for drug development. There's now a guidance on the IID that everybody's going to read. And in July, we already began our path towards meeting our GDUFA 2 commitments by implementing new consistent data standards in the IID to improve accuracy. As we move towards 2020, you're going to gradually see more changes in the IID, including maximum daily exposure and a link to a change log. And you can contact us through various means that I showed you on the previous slide. So with that, I'm going to finish, and I just want to acknowledge all the people that helped me with the IID. Of course, I don't fix things myself. There's a whole IT staff behind me. Rebecca Granger, who's in the audience, who does everything in the background, answers the questions in the mailbox, and various duties as assigned. And Marion Kang, our new ORISE fellow, who I don't know if she's here, but she has been working on validating the IID. So with that, I thank you for listening.